I tried to run a sub-3-hour marathon and failed. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Pure Ambition podcast. This is something a little different than what I typically do. I haven't been doing a ton of these solo episodes, but after taking some time to reflect on my sub-3-hour marathon attempt about a week and a half ago at this point, and my failure at that attempt, I wanted to hop on here and share a few things that have been going through my head, a few of my biggest takeaways, things that I realized after running the race, things that were in my head during the race, kind of take a look back at my training over the past couple of months, why I even started to try and attempt this sub-3-hour marathon after not even being a runner for even a year. Like, I started running consistently in June of 2022. I was running here and there, nothing consistently leading up to that after my career playing college football ended. That was November or December of 2021. And then really having lost my identity and needing something to train for. And then I stumbled upon running, which has gotten us to where we are now. But I wanted to kind of share the list of positives, negatives from the race, from the training block in general. Kind of just recap the whole journey and the process leading up to it. Why I didn't hit my goal. And I'm also going to share a breakdown of the event. So the Coastal Delaware Running Festival Marathon, just kind of share how the whole experience went from start to finish, from the trip down there, leading up to it the night before, and then ultimately going out there and running it the next day with a finishing time of 3 hours and 21 minutes. And, maybe what could I have done differently throughout this race? What could I have done differently that would have changed the outcome of the race? Do I think there was anything that I could have done that would have ultimately helped me reach my time? Or, was it just not my day? Which, that happens sometimes. And ultimately, what I learned from this event and what I'll take from it moving forward. So, getting into running, I ran the Philly Marathon. That was my first marathon in November, and I started training for that in July of last year. And it was for something bigger than myself. I raised money for a friend of mine's nonprofit called Selfless Solutions, which is a nonprofit that helps children in Tanzania and also business owners just have the chance at a flourishing lifestyle. And, so I had a why and a reason behind why I was getting up and doing that every single day, because it was something bigger than myself. And I picked Philadelphia Marathon because it was in my hometown, and I had, a good amount of crowd support. I had friends out there. I had my mom out there. So it was a great event in general, and I trained mostly in the summer months and in the warm weather for that. And then I ran, and it was really cold that day, but I don't know. I am definitely more of a cold weather runner. It's more of what I've been adapted to. So this past training block, after running that 3 hour and 20-minute marathon in Philly in November, I immediately knew that I wanted to go for sub 3 hours. So I took a week off of running, not even a week, I took a couple days off of running, but I knew that I wanted to go for sub 3. So I talked with my coach, and we put together a nice plan that was about 18 weeks leading up to the Coastal Delaware Running Festival Marathon, which was last week. And I picked Coastal Delaware because, it gave me enough time to continue to build my base, gave me enough time to get some speed work under my belt, practice my fueling strategy, just get used to going at that pace for that long and that amount of time, which I'd never done before. So it gave me a good chunk, a good window. And I picked Coastal Delaware because it wasn't too far from my house. It was about 2.5 hour drive down there, so not too bad. And I wanted to pick something relatively flat because I didn't want to be, having to go through a bunch of hills, rolling hills, a lot of elevation when I'm going to be moving that fast, because in 26.2 miles, even the smallest hills give you a little bit of trouble and can really, make you have to exert more effort than you really want to in those races. So Coastal Delaware really only had 3 climbs, and they weren't anything substantial, but they were I definitely felt them last week for sure. But it just seemed like the perfect race to do. It was marketed as, Boston qualifier through the, beautiful state park of Cape Henlopen and through the town of Rehoboth, starts and ends on the boardwalk. And granted, it was an incredible sunrise, great vibes to start the morning. But I also was sweating a lot before the race even started. So in that moment, I knew, like, okay, it's definitely a little hotter than I had prepared for, but this is the circumstances that we have, and we're just going to go out there and do it. And granted, I had been training in Pennsylvania in the winter for the past 4.5 months, and really there was maybe one day that got above 70 degrees, but even still, I run early in the morning, so I think I still had a sweatshirt on that day. So 99% of my runs had been in, pretty chilly weather. I was down in Austin, Texas for a couple weeks about a month ago, but even then it was like there was a couple runs that were decently hot. And like the first run that I did down there kind of kicked my butt just because I wasn't used to the humidity. But the rest of the time I was there, it was actually pretty chilly and kind of rainy. So it was not very different from the training that I've been doing while I was in PA. So I really didn't get that heat training, and I didn't know what to expect. I didn't really think it was going to be hot. I didn't think it was going to be that humid, especially in mid-April, even in Delaware. But we had conditions that were less than ideal. They was, high 70s, low 80s with, 90+% humidity. And like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, like from the start, I was like, yo, it is freaking hot, even at 6:30 in the morning. So, there may have been a little bit of underfueling going on. Like, I was thinking about the first marathon that I did, and I feel like I overhydrated a little bit just because I had to pee like a couple times the morning of the race before I even started. And then the whole race, I had to pee so bad in Philly, but I held out. I did not use the bathroom the entire race. I freaking held out, but I didn't want to have to do that. I didn't want to have that feeling of having to go to the bathroom the whole time. I didn't want to be, using the bathroom several times in the morning before I had a race and, excreting all the electrolytes and fluids that I had the day before, the days leading up to it, because I did think that my hydration strategy was pretty solid. However, I did not add in the factor of how hot it was going to be. Like when I ran Philly, it was in the low 40s, so I wasn't sweating as much. And in turn, like I wasn't losing as much fluid, I wasn't losing as much electrolytes, I wasn't having to replenish those lost glycogen stores, those lost sodium stores as much. And this time it was a completely different ballgame. The sun was beating down from the time that I started warming up till the time I finished, and obviously it only got hotter. And my nutrition strategy for the race, this is where I messed up. This is something, if I could go back, this is probably what I would have changed about it. My nutrition strategy wasn't on point. So what I mean by that is I left a little bit of ambiguity up to what I was going to be doing on race day. I had practiced a good amount of things throughout my training. Like I had taken various gels with me on long runs. I had tried different ones to see which ones worked with me, which ones didn't work with me very well. But ultimately, the day before the race, I was still wondering what my actual fueling strategy was going to be for gels throughout the race. So I ended up going with 3 Martin gels, which if I was going to go back, I would have taken all Martin gels. And now I realize too, okay, I probably will in the future have backup gels and take different kinds with me and see what, you know, the day holds. Like, for example, this race, I took 3 Martin gels and I took 3 goo gels with me. But the mistake I made with the goo gels is you have to take them, you don't have to, but they go down a lot easier when you take them with water, whereas the Martin gels are water-based. So I took a Martin gel 5 minutes before the start line, or 5 minutes before the race started, rather. And then I took a goo gel 40 minutes into the race. And then I took a Martin gel an hour and 10 minutes into the race. And then, so those were I think by that point I was out of the Martin gels. No. Okay, so I had a Martin gel left over at the end of the race because I actually forgot that I had it in my back pocket. But when I started to transition over into the goo gels, I actually made the dumb mistake of taking caffeinated gels, and I hadn't taken the caffeinated goo gels. I took them once in my final training cycle, but I figured, these are the gels that I took for Philly. I should be fine. And them just being warm when I took them too, about, almost halfway into the race, and then halfway into the race, my stomach, I couldn't take them down. I took one, I ripped it open, and I took some out of the gel, and I spit it out, and I threw the gel. And at that point, I knew I was in for some trouble. So I knew it was going to be a fight to the finish. There were aid stations around every 2 miles throughout the race. But to be honest with you, it felt, at some points, it felt like they were like 5 miles away. But in reality, I think at some points they were like 2.5, closer to 3 miles away. But even still, I didn't practice with yellow Gatorade Endurance, which they were going to have on the course. And they had that, and they had water. And so at each aid station, I would just grab a couple waters, and I would toss them on my head just to try to cool my body down. And then I would take a Gatorade, and I would sip a little bit as much as I could. I would hold on to it for, a couple feet, a couple meters. Take a little bit of that, and then just freaking toss it if I couldn't finish all of it, just because my stomach churned over. At mile 6, I really started to feel that my stomach was going to be a problem. And while I was able to hold under a 7-minute pace, around a 6:53, 6:54 pace through the first half marathon, which was slightly slower than I had wanted to do, that I wanted to go at, but I was still keeping the 3-hour pacer in my sight. Like, I wasn't with the 3-hour pacing group, but I kept the 3-hour pacer in my sight just because that was the plan. And as the race got on, I was going to speed up a little bit, and then, cross the finish line with the 3-hour pacer, maybe slightly ahead of him, and be at sub-3. But as the race went on, as soon as I started getting to mile 10, mile 11, mile 12, and then by the halfway point, I could not stomach anything. I started to get these, cramps in my stomach, which I had some salt sticks, so I had little salt tablets, and I tried to take a couple of them down. I sucked on them for a little bit, but my stomach was not taking them down either. So eventually, I took down as much as I could, and then I spit them out, and, kind of just had to rinse my mouth out with water moving forward. But, again, my strategy throughout the race, I didn't sit down with my crew that was there, which was my mom and my brother. Shout out to them. They were amazing, and I'm grateful to have a family that was able to be there and support me. This was so much more different than Philly. Like, I saw my mom and my friends who were there in Philly twice throughout the race. And my mom and brother, I think I saw them like 7 or 8 times throughout the race. They were driving alongside me at one point at mile 16, where I was really, really, really struggling. That was like the last big incline, and I was hurting. And that last 8 miles was the biggest pain cave that I've ever had to go through in my life. And I had to stop and walk a few times because I was getting full body cramps. And I never stopped, but I kept moving forward, but I did have to walk, which was not even in the cards. Like, that was not something that I wanted to do whatsoever. But those last 8 miles, it's hard for me to really even remember them. I was just kind of in a daze, which is kind of scary. And then, crossing the finish line, I barely remember that, and I almost blacked out just because I had lost so much fluid. I had lost so much electrolytes, and I wasn't able to take down any nutrition in the whole second half of the run. So my kidneys were just overworking. They were overused, and, mentally, marathons can take a lot out of you, just as much as physically. So mentally and physically, I was hurting. My mom and my brother had to hold me up once I finished. I was trying to walk it off and cool down a little bit, but I was about to fall over. So, they walked me over to the med tent. I laid down in the shade for about an hour. Slowly started to eat a little bit of a banana. My mom, thank God, had brought some Element electrolyte packets, which, I drank 2 of them the morning of the race. So getting a little bit of a sodium load in, drank that with some coconut water. And, I felt good. Like, that I had done in weeks prior. I had done that in my training before my long runs. But again, there was too much novelty in the day of the race. And, I preach this on social media, and to everybody else who I talk to ask me for race advice, is don't do anything new on race day. Make sure you practice your strategy in weeks in advance. And I didn't do as great of a job of that as I should have. I should have taken, those more of those long runs to practice the fueling strategy, to account for what I was going to be taking in the heat. Like, I knew the next day that when I was buying my gels, because I always go down to my local running store and get them the day before my races, the day before my runs, and things like that. But the Martin gels were going down a little bit easier, just because, like I said, they're water based and they don't have as much in them. But I also really like spring energy gels, which are all natural stuff, and they're very easy to go down. It kind of tastes like applesauce. It's pretty good. But even that, I don't know if that would have been, a great thing to have with me, just because, again, it was really hot. So I probably would have gone with just straight Martin gels for the most part. And, man, it's just frustrating. It's really frustrating to look back and, at the end of the day, would all of that stuff have made a difference and allowed me to go sub-3? I don't know. There were a lot of people that I talked to after the race who didn't hit their goals, and the heat, the sun was just really tough and really brutal. So, I wasn't the only one out there struggling, but it was definitely a learning experience. It was definitely a humbling experience for sure as well. Like I said, I'm new to this whole running thing. I've been doing it for less than a year. So this is only my second marathon, my third race. My first race was a 10-mile beach run last summer, and then I did the Philly Marathon, obviously, and then I did Coastal Delaware last week. So there's so much that I still have to learn. And one of the questions that I've been getting asked is, if I could go back, is there anything that I would have done differently over this last training cycle, or during the days leading up to the race, or race day in and of itself? And the more that I've been thinking about it, in terms of training, I followed my coach Mark Bottenhord's plan to a T. There was one run that I had to cut short because I had gotten like 3 hours of sleep. I didn't take my rest. I ran my long run on Sunday, so I didn't get that extra rest day. And so it was like a Thursday. I was supposed to do 8, and I only ended up doing 3 just because, or no, it was a Tuesday. So I ended up doing 3 instead of 8 because I had a 10-miler the next day, a 10-mile speed run the next day. So it was all laid out for me, and I followed it to a T, and I hit all of my splits. I don't think there was ever a split that I had missed throughout the whole training block. I nailed all my times, but unfortunately, just because you put in the work, just because you feel like you're ready, it doesn't always mean you do. So in terms of the actual training, a lot of people have been saying in my DMs, in my comments, you need to do more speed in your long runs, which, you know, maybe. But again, I trust Mark. He's coached over 100 athletes to Boston qualifiers. So obviously his coaching is top notch, and he knows what he's doing. And we did do, you know, 10-mile plus runs at marathon pace. It's just what people see on social media. It's just me doing the long runs where, you know, some of those I did have like a couple miles of marathon pace thrown in there or at the end, but predominantly my longest runs were zone 2 around, you know, 8:15 minute per mile pace. But I wouldn't have done anything different there. In terms of my strength training, I dialed it back from what I did in the fall for the Philly Marathon. And I was really only doing, back then I was doing 2 leg days a week, and I just felt really tired and depleted. And, you know, I just felt like I wasn't able to give my best on some of those long run days. So this training block, I was very strategic, and I did 3 days with 1 day, with that leg day replaced with like an injury prevention day, adding some core, some functional movements in there. And I felt a lot better. Like I felt myself getting stronger. I was focusing on strength and power. So higher weight, lower reps, and doing that leg day on the same day as my speed work. So that was a tough day, but it allowed me to recover for the speed work later in the week and long run, which was on Saturday. So again, I wouldn't change anything different there. However, leading up to the race, there really wasn't anything that I would change differently either. Like my carb load was on point. I'm a bigger guy. I'm 6 foot, 195 pounds. So I had to eat a lot of food. So I was eating around 3,900 calories and around 650 grams of carbs. And I brought proteins and fats down, just because at that point my body was going to be running off of predominantly carbohydrates. And I also sodium loaded, so I practiced sodium loading before my long runs. I made sure that my salt stores were properly loaded up so that I was ready to rock on race day. But I did have a different meal the night before, slightly different meal the night before than I had before all of my long runs. So obviously I wasn't at my house. I was down at the beach. So I went to a very nice Italian restaurant with my mom, my brother, and my friend David, who was also attempting a sub-3-hour marathon. And I got some pasta, some bolognese, and with some rigatoni. And, you know, while I really didn't eat much of the meat, there were still like meat and some onions and some carrots in there. And I probably shouldn't have had that. You know, I had a couple pieces of bread too, which was absolutely phenomenal. So the in terms of carbs, I felt like I had enough, but then also I didn't eat enough during the day. So even after that big pasta dinner with the bread, about an hour and a half, 2 hours later, I still had a lot of carbs to finish. So I had like a peanut butter and jelly, a banana, some mango, some more coconut water. So ate a lot right before I went to bed and woke up, and I ate a little bit more than I typically would for my long runs. Like I had an extra slice of toast with a little bit, basically just like an extra slice of toast and a little bit more dried mango than I was used to. And, you know, I don't think that was the contributing factor as to why my stomach didn't feel right. I think it could have been the underhydration that I had the day before. Just, you know, nervous that I didn't want to have to stop to use the bathroom throughout the race, because I kind of followed the same strategy in terms of hydration that I did in my first marathon. So I felt like I was fine. You know, I felt like I was going to be okay. But I didn't account for the heat and how hot it was going to be and how much I was actually going to be sweating and losing. So that was a little bit frustrating. It's something when I look back on, it's a mistake that I made, and not one that I'm going to make again, is having too much novelty the day before the race. in the day of the race. And I also decided not to run with a water bottle. So no carbohydrate powder, no electrolytes, nothing like that. Just because I really don't like to run with a water bottle. It kind of just annoys me, even though I do run with my phone. Content creator. But if I was to go back, I would have strategically gone through the map with my mom and my brother who were going to be there and had them have water bottles filled with some carbohydrate powder and some electrolytes in there for me. That probably would have helped me rather than just struggling through the whole rest of the race. And, you know, there were even a station or two where I just kind of flopped through the aid station and I accidentally missed grabbing the Gatorade. I grabbed the water and poured it on my head, but I missed the Gatorade, and so I had to wait another like 2-ish miles to get to the next aid station to get some Gatorade and some water, which that really hurt. That really hurt me moving forward, and I knew it was just going to be a fight to the finish. I was on pace for the first half marathon, but after that it was a fight to the finish for sure, unfortunately. So overall, the race as a whole was not what I had hoped for. It wasn't really what I was expecting. There was a lot of crushed gravel throughout the race too, which was really hard on my feet. And I ran into Saucony Endorphin Elites, which felt great in my training that I did in them, but on race day really started to hurt my feet. So I ran in the Saucony Endorphin Speeds in my first marathon, and they felt good. I felt really good in them. I didn't have the same issues that I had with the Elites. And for my next race, whenever that'll be, my next road race, I'll probably go with some of the Nikes, probably the Vaporflies. I haven't heard, great things about the Alpha Flies, so I'll probably go with the Vaporflies for the next one. But you live and you learn. It's a learning experience. It's just a learning experience. Like as frustrating as it is, this just wasn't the day. And I'm at peace with it because I've never trained for anything harder than I did for this race. This was the toughest thing that I've ever done mentally or physically. And, for the next marathon training block, I definitely will be incorporating some more speed into those long runs. Mark and I have talked about that. In terms of nutrition, I'm going to be locked in like months and weeks ahead, coming up with a strategy that I'm going to stick with on race day. I will also have a crew with me that can pass me off water bottles filled with carbohydrate powder and electrolytes that I'll practice with, and kind of mimic those on the trails that I'm running for those long runs. But all in all, I will be more locked in and dialed into that. And also, I'm probably not going to go with pasta. I feel like I've been having some issues every time I've been eating gluten recently. So maybe that could have been an issue. I'm not sure, but I think I'm going to stick with potatoes and white rice for my carbohydrate of choice moving forward the night before, with a little bit of protein, a little bit of chicken, but not too much because we don't want to have too much protein in there. So overall, lot of positives overall from this training cycle, but certainly some negatives and things that we can build on for the next training block for my running career in general. I don't know what the future is gonna hold. I haven't decided when the next time I'm going to go for the sub-3-hour marathon is going to be. I'm confident that the next time I run it, I will be prepped and ready to go for it. And I'm also going to sign up for a half marathon probably a month before whenever I decide to run the sub-3. But all in all, I'm at peace with how this marathon went. It was tough. I actually ran 1 minute worse than I did in Philly. Again, I was on pace for the first half, but after that, I knew that I was just getting slower and it was going to be a fight to the finish. But all in all, running is still new to me. I still have a lot to learn. I know that. and I just want to share my journey, my process along the way as I continue to learn, as I continue to explore. And, my ultimate goal is to help you improve as an athlete and to reach your full potential. So that's it for this episode. I thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you in the next episode. Peace.